The sound of tearing silk was louder than the gunshot that would follow it 3 hours later. In the middle of the crowded ballroom at the Pierre Hotel, Vivian Sterling stood with a cruel smirk, a jagged piece of a waitress's apron in her manicured hand. The crowd laughed. They saw a clumsy server who didn't belong. They saw a victim. But they were wrong. They didn't notice the cold, predatory calculation in the waitress's eyes, nor did they see the man walking through the gilded double doors, the most feared capo in New York. That wasn't a waitress. That was the woman who held the leash to the devil himself. And tonight, someone was going to pay. The chandeliers of the grand ballroom at the Pierre were blinding, casting fractured light over a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. It was the annual charity gala for the Sterling Foundation, a glittering facade for what was essentially the largest money-laundering operation on the East Coast. Sienna Moretti adjusted the starched collar of her black server's uniform. It scratched her neck, a stark contrast to the cashmere and silk she usually wore. She balanced a silver tray loaded with crystal flutes of Dom Perignon, moving through the crowd with the practiced invisibility of someone who knew how to disappear. "Champagne, sir," she murmured, lowering her head as she offered a glass to a senator whose name was currently on a hit list in 3 different boroughs. "Keep walking, sweetheart." The man dismissed her without a glance, turning back to his conversation. "I'm telling you, Arthur, the shipments from the port in Newark are secure. The Italians don't have the manpower to check every crate." Sienna's eyes narrowed slightly. The Italians. That was her family, or rather her husband's family. She was Sienna Moretti, wife of Dominic Moretti, the Don of the New York Camorra. To the world, Dominic was a ghost, a myth. To Sienna, he was the man who kissed her forehead every morning and taught her how to disassemble a Glock 19 in under 30 seconds. Tonight, she wasn't the Donna. She was Sarah, a temp waitress hired through a shell agency. Dominic had forbidden it, of course. "It's too dangerous, Si," he had growled 2 nights ago, pacing the length of their penthouse study. "Arthur Sterling is a snake. If he finds out who you are—" "He won't," Sienna had countered, fixing his tie. "He's never seen me. No one has. You've kept me hidden in the shadows for 3 years, Dom. It's time I became useful. You need proof that Sterling is moving narcotics through your territory. I can get close enough to hear what your soldiers can't." Now, standing in the lion's den, she felt the rush of adrenaline. She moved toward the VIP section, a raised platform cordoned off by velvet ropes. This was where the Sterling family held court. Arthur Sterling was a bloated man, with a face like kneaded dough, currently laughing at a joke made by his daughter, Vivian Sterling. Vivian was the crown jewel of the Sterling Empire, or so she thought. She was beautiful in a sharp, brittle way, wearing a crimson dress that probably cost more than the average American's mortgage. She held court with a glass of vodka in one hand, her other hand resting possessively on the arm of her fiancé, a rising prosecutor named Charles. Sienna approached the table, her tray steady. She needed to get close to Arthur's phone, which was sitting on the table next to his bread plate. Just a quick scan with the device in her pocket, and she'd have the encryption keys Dominic needed. "More drinks, Mr. Sterling?" Sienna asked, her voice flat and subservient. Arthur didn't look up. "Leave the bottle." Sienna reached forward to place a fresh bottle on the table. As she did, the device in her apron pocket buzzed. Data cloning complete. She suppressed a smirk. It was too easy. She began to back away. Mission accomplished. She just needed to slip out the kitchen exit, get into the waiting black SUV, and hand the data to Dominic. But fate, it seemed, had a flair for the dramatic. As Sienna turned, Vivian Sterling stood up abruptly, her elbow knocking into Sienna's tray. A single half-empty flute of champagne wobbled and tipped, splashing a meager teaspoon of liquid onto the hem of Vivian's crimson gown. The music didn't stop, but the silence at table 1 was deafening. Vivian looked down at the dime-sized wet spot on her dress. Then she looked up at Sienna. Her eyes weren't just angry. They were dead. "You clumsy little rat!" Vivian hissed her voice, carrying over the low hum of conversation. Sienna froze. Her instinct was to snap back. She was a Moretti after all. But she was undercover. She had to play the part. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," Sienna said, lowering her head. "I'll get a towel right away." "A towel?" Vivian laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think a towel fixes a Valentino custom? Do you have any idea who I am?" "Vivian, sit down," Arthur grumbled, looking embarrassed. "It's just a spill." "It's not just a spill, Daddy," Vivian shrieked, playing to the crowd now. People were turning to watch. "It's incompetence. It's disrespect." She took a step toward Sienna, looming over her. Sienna stood her ground, her muscles tensing. She could drop Vivian in 2 moves, a strike to the throat, a sweep of the leg. But she couldn't. Not yet. "I want her fired," Vivian announced to the room. She looked around, seeking validation from the wealthy elite. "Someone get the manager. I want this trash out of my sight." Sienna clenched her jaw. "Just walk away, Sienna. You have the data." "I'll leave, Ma'am," Sienna said quietly. She turned to go, but Vivian wasn't done. She hadn't extracted enough blood to satisfy her ego. As Sienna turned, Vivian reached out, grabbing the back of Sienna's cheap white apron and the black dress underneath. The sound was distinct, a sharp "rape" that echoed through the sudden silence of the ballroom. Vivian had yanked hard, tearing the fabric of Sienna's waitress uniform from the shoulder blade down to the waist. The cheap polyester gave way instantly, exposing the black lace boutillier Sienna wore underneath a piece of lingerie that was decidedly not waitress attire. It was La Perla, hand-stitched a gift from Dominic for their anniversary. Sienna stumbled forward, but caught herself. She spun around, clutching the torn fabric to her chest, her eyes flashing with a fire she could no longer suppress. The crowd gasped. A few men whistled. Vivian held the torn strip of fabric like a trophy. "Oops," she sneered, feigning shock. "Looks like your clothes are as cheap as your skills. What is that underneath? Did you come here to serve drinks or sell yourself to my father's guests?" The insult hung in the air, thick and toxic. The floor manager, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson, came running over, sweating profanely. "Miss Sterling, I am so sorry. We will handle this immediately." He turned to Sienna, his face twisting into a scowl. "You get out. You're fired. Don't even think about collecting your pay." Sienna looked at Mr. Henderson, then back at Vivian. The mission was done. She had the data. But the disrespect, the humiliation, it burned in her blood. The Moretti Code was simple. Respect is earned, but insult is repaid in blood. However, she had to think of the bigger picture. If she caused a scene now, Arthur might check his phone security. Sienna took a deep breath, smoothing her expression into one of icy calm. She dropped the torn fabric. She didn't cover herself. She stood tall, her posture shifting from subservient server to regal queen in a split second. "You can keep the fabric, Vivian," Sienna said, her voice clear and steady, devoid of the fear they expected. "It seems you're desperate for attention. Consider it a donation to your charity." Vivian's jaw dropped. The crowd murmured. Waitresses didn't speak like that. Waitresses cried and ran away. "Excuse me." Vivian stepped forward, her face flushing red. "Security. Get this whore out of here before you what?" The voice came from the entrance of the ballroom. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a thunderclap. It was a baritone rumble that vibrated through the floorboards, stopping every conversation in the room. The double doors at the far end of the ballroom had swung open. Standing there was a man who looked like he had been carved out of midnight and violence. He was tall, over 6'4", wearing a tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders like armor. His hair was dark, swept back, and his eyes were the color of cold steel. Behind him stood 4 men, silent and massive. Dominic Moretti. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Arthur Sterling. His eyes were locked on one person, and one person only, Sienna. He saw the torn dress. He saw the exposed lace. He saw the flush on her cheeks. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dominic began to walk. He didn't rush. He moved with the terrifying grace of a predator that knows it has no natural enemies. The crowd parted instantly, creating a wide path down the center of the room. People who ran hedge funds and controlled governments stepped back, averting their eyes. They knew who he was. Even if they had never seen his face, they felt the aura of death that clung to him. "Who the hell is that?" Vivian asked, her voice trembling slightly, though she tried to maintain her bravado. Arthur Sterling went pale. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "Dominic," he whispered. Dominic ignored him. He walked straight to Sienna. He stopped inches from her, his large body shielding her from the prying eyes of the room. Without a word, he took off his tuxedo jacket. The silk lining rustled as he draped it over Sienna's shoulders, enveloping her in his warmth and his scent, sandalwood and gunpowder. He buttoned the jacket at her chin, his knuckles grazing her jaw with infinite tenderness. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly, his voice a stark contrast to the terror he projected to the room. "No," Sienna replied, looking up into his eyes. "Just annoyed." Dominic nodded. He turned slowly, keeping one arm wrapped securely around Sienna's waist. He faced Vivian Sterling. Vivian, not one to be ignored, scoffed. "So the help has a boyfriend? How cute. Did you come to pick up your little girlfriend?" "She ruined my dress." Dominic looked at her. He didn't blink. He looked at her the way a boot looks at an ant. "Arthur," Dominic said. He didn't shout. He spoke conversationally. Arthur Sterling hurried around the table, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Miss Moretti, I didn't expect to see you here. We didn't send an invite because we know you value your privacy." "Miss Moretti?" Vivian froze. She looked from her father to the dark stranger. The blood drained from her face. "Your daughter," Dominic said, gesturing vaguely at Vivian, "seems to be under the impression that my wife is a member of your staff." The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Wife," Vivian stammered. "Wife," Arthur squeaked. He looked at Sienna. The waitress, he had ignored the woman his daughter had assaulted. Dominic pulled Sienna tighter against his side. "Sienna Moretti, the only person in this world who matters to me. And you?" Dominic took a step toward Vivian, and she stumbled back in her heels, terrified. You just ripped the clothes off her body. Dominic turned his head slightly to the men standing behind him. Lock the doors, he ordered calmly. No one leaves. The heavy thud of the ballroom doors locking echoed like a gavel striking a sound block. The air in the room grew thin, sucked out by the collective gasp of 300 of New York's elite. The orchestra had stopped playing mid-measure, leaving a suffocating silence where the only sound was the clinking of ice in a glass from a trembling hand somewhere in the back. Dominic Moretti didn't shout. He didn't need to. He stood with one arm around Sienna, his presence filling the room more effectively than a bomb threat. He looked at Mr. Henderson, the floor manager who had sneered at Sienna moments ago. You, Dominic said. It was a simple word, but it landed like a whip crack. Henderson was shaking so violently his clipboard rattled. Moretti, I had no idea. You fired her. Dominic stated, his voice devoid of emotion. You looked at my wife, saw a woman working for a living, and decided she was beneath you. You denied her pay. Dominic released Sienna for a brief second, stepping toward the manager. Henderson took a step back, tripping over his own feet and landing hard on his backside. I'll buy the hotel, Dominic said, looking up at the vaulted ceiling as if inspecting the architecture. Tomorrow morning, and your name will be on a list that ensures you never work in this city again, not even scrubbing toilets. He turned his back on the sobbing man, dismissing his existence entirely. His attention returned to the main event, the Sterlings. Vivian Sterling was hyperventilating. She looked at her fiancé Charles, the ambitious prosecutor. Charles, do something, arrest him. He can't keep us here. Charles, who had spent the last 5 years building a reputation as a tough-on-crime attorney, looked at Dominic Moretti. He looked at the 4 guards, standing by the doors, men with bulges under their jackets that were definitely not wallets. Then he looked at his fiancée. Shut up, Vivian, Charles whispered, harshly stepping away from her. What? Vivian shrieked. I'm not dying for your temper, Charles hissed, loosening his tie as if the collar was strangling him. That is the head of the Camorra. If he wants to burn this building down with us inside, the fire department will probably wait until he finishes his cigar to put it out. Vivian stood alone. Her allies had crumbled. Her father Arthur was wiping his forehead with a napkin, his face a mask of grey terror. Mr. Moretti, Arthur tried again, his voice cracking. Please, my daughter, she is spoiled. She didn't know. We can make amends. Name your price. A donation. A partnership. Dominic laughed. It was a dark, dry sound. A partnership, Arthur, you don't have anything I want, except your apology. And I don't want it for me. Dominic turned to Sienna. He took her hand, kissing the knuckles, then looked at her with a mix of adoration and deference. What do you want to do with them, Cara? They are yours. The room held its breath. Sienna stepped forward, the oversized tuxedo jacket swallowing her petite frame, but doing nothing to hide the steel in her spine. She looked at Vivian. Vivian was trembling, clutching her purse. She expected Sienna to scream, to slap her, to demand money. Sienna smiled. It was the smile of a woman who knew exactly where the bodies were buried, because she had helped dig the holes. You ruined my dress because you thought I was a nobody. Sienna said, her voice calm and melodic. You thought power comes from the label on your back or the man on your arm. Sienna walked slowly toward Vivian. The crowd parted further. I don't want your money, Vivian. I don't want your apology because it wouldn't be sincere. Sienna stopped inches from her. I want you to understand what it feels like to be stripped. Sienna turned to the crowd. Mr. Sterling is hosting a charity gala, isn't he? To help the underprivileged. She looked back at Vivian. Your dress, Sienna said, pointing to the crimson custom Valentino. "Take it off." Vivian's eyes widened to the size of saucers. "What?" "You heard her." Dominic's voice rumbled from behind. "You ripped the clothes off my wife in front of 300 people. It seems only fair that the scales are balanced." I can't," Vivian cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "Daddy." Arthur looked at the floor. He knew the rules of the jungle better than his daughter. When a predator corners you, you sacrifice a limb to save the body. "Vivian," Arthur said, his voice defeated. "Do as she says." "Daddy." "Do it before he kills us all," Arthur roared, snapping under the pressure. Sobbing, her hands shaking uncontrollably, Vivian reached for the zipper at the back of her gown. The humiliation was palpable. The crowd watched a mix of horror and fascination. The sound of the zipper lowering was a harsh rasp in the silent room. The dress pooled at her feet. Vivian stood in her expensive silk slip, shivering not from cold, but from shame. She crossed her arms over her chest, unable to look anyone in the eye. Sienna didn't gloat. She didn't laugh. She simply nodded, her expression bored. "See," Sienna said softly. "Without the dress, without the daddy, without the title, you're just a scared little girl. Remember this feeling the next time you decide to treat a server like trash." Sienna turned on her heel and walked back to Dominic. She slipped her hand into the crook of his arm. "I'm bored, Dom," she said. "Let's go home. I have a headache." Dominic glared at the room one last time, searing the faces of the witnesses into his memory. "If I see a single photo of this night on social media," he announced, "I will assume it came from one of you, and I will visit you personally." He signaled his men. The doors were unlocked. Dominic and Sienna walked out, leaving the Sterling legacy in ruins on the ballroom floor. The ride back to the Moretti estate was silent, but it was a comfortable silence. The armored Cadillac Escalade wove through the streets of Manhattan, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. In the back seat, the tension that had held Sienna upright finally snapped. She slumped against the leather seat, letting out a long exhale. Dominic was there instantly. He pulled her into his lap, not caring about the wrinkles in his shirt or the fact that his driver could see them in the rear-view mirror. He ran a hand through her hair, his touch gentle. "You did well," he murmured, kissing her temple. "You were magnificent." Sienna rested her head on his shoulder. "I hated it. I hated the way they looked at me before they knew who I was. It's disgusting, Dom. How do they live with themselves?" "They don't live," Dominic said darkly. "They exist. They feed on validation. You took that away from her tonight." Sienna shifted, reaching into the pocket of the torn apron she still had wadded up in her hand. She pulled out the small black data cloner. "It wasn't just for the show," she said, her voice shifting from tired wife to efficient operative. "I got it." Arthur's phone was on the table for 10 minutes while he argued about the wine list. "I cloned everything. Texts, call, logs, encrypted apps." Dominic took the device, his eyes narrowing. "You're sure he didn't see?" "He was too busy ignoring me," Sienna smirked. "Being invisible has its perks." Dominic handed the device to the man in the front passenger seat, his consigliere Leo. "Leo, decrypt this, now. I want to know who Sterling is talking to." Leo nodded, plugging the device into a laptop. For the next 10 minutes, the only sound was the typing of keys and the hum of the engine. Sienna closed her eyes, letting the adrenaline fade. She felt safe in Dominic's arms, but a nagging feeling in her gut wouldn't go away. Arthur Sterling was a coward. Yes. But cowards usually didn't launder money on the scale the Sterlings were accused of, without a powerful backer. "Boss!" Leo's voice broke the silence. It was tight, urgent. Dominic stiffened. "What is it?" Leo turned the laptop screen around so they could see. It was a transcript of a chat log from an encrypted messaging app called Signal. The messages were between Arthur Sterling and a user named Viper. Sterling. "The shipment is delayed. The feds are sniffing around the docks." Viper. "I don't care about the feds. I care about the timeline. If the weapons aren't in Jersey by Friday, the deal with the Russians is off." Sterling. "I can't move them. The Camorra controls the unions at the port. Moretti's men are everywhere." Viper. "Then maybe it's time Moretti wasn't everywhere. Keep him distracted. I have a team moving into place. We take the head off the snake on the 15th. Dominic read the screen, his face hardening into a mask of stone. "The 15th. "That's tomorrow," Sienna whispered, reading over his shoulder. "The 15th is tomorrow." "Who is Viper?" Dominic asked, his voice low and dangerous. Leo typed furiously. "Tracing the IP. It's bouncing through servers in Singapore, London, and—" "Wait." Leo paused. "It's local. A hardline connection." "Where?" "The penthouse at the Obsidian Tower," Leo said, looking up, his face pale. "That's Victor Draven." Dominic finished the sentence. The name hung in the air like toxic smoke. Victor Draven was a ghost story in the underworld, an arms dealer who had been exiled from New York 5 years ago by Dominic's father. He was supposed to be in Europe or dead. If he was back, and if he was using Sterling to move weapons through Moretti territory, it meant war. But the text said something else. "We take the head off the snake." They aren't just moving product, Sienna realized, clutching Dominic's arm. "It's a hit. They're planning to kill you tomorrow." Dominic looked at the date on his watch. He looked at Sienna. "Not me," he said slowly. He scrolled down the chat log to the very last message sent just 30 minutes ago while they were at the gala. Viper change of plans. He brought the wife out of hiding. I saw the live feed from the gala. She's the weak point. Grab the girl, and Moretti will burn the city down to find her. He'll walk right into the trap. Sienna felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "They were watching," she whispered. "At the gala." "Turn the car around." Dominic roared, his calm facade shattering. "Leo, call the house. Tell the guards to lock down the perimeter. We're 2 minutes away, boss," the driver shouted, swerving around a taxi. "They know," Dominic growled, pulling his handgun from the holster beneath his seat. He racked the slide, checking the chamber. He handed a smaller pistol, a Sig Sauer P238, to Sienna. "Take this." "Dom, what's happening?" "Sterling was the distraction," Dominic said, his eyes scanning the dark road ahead. "The spilled drink, the drama. It kept us occupied. While we were playing games in the ballroom, Draven was moving on the house." The car screeched around the final corner, leading to the gates of the Moretti estate. Usually the iron gates were manned by 2 armed guards. Tonight the gates were wide open. The guard booth was dark, and in the center of the driveway, blocking the path to the mansion, sat a delivery van. "Ambush!" the driver screamed. An RPG rocket streak lit up the night, hissing from the tree line. The world dissolved into fire and noise. The RPG rocket struck the pavement just 3 feet to the right of the Cadillac Escalade. The explosion didn't hit the chassis directly, but the shock wave was enough to lift the 3-ton armored vehicle into the air like a child's toy. Inside, the world spun violently. Sienna felt the seatbelt lock against her chest, snapping the air from her lungs. Metal shrieked against asphalt as the SUV landed on its side, skidding 30 feet down the driveway before slamming into the stone retaining wall of the estate. Silence followed for a heartbeat, a ringing, deafening silence. Then the shouting started. "Secure the perimeter flank, left no witnesses." The voices were professional, disciplined. These weren't street thugs. These were mercenaries. Inside the crushed cabin, Dominic groaned. A spiderweb of blood ran down his forehead, blinding his left eye. He wasn't disoriented, though. He was enraged. "Sienna." He rasped his hand immediately, searching for her in the dark, smoke-filled interior. "Sienna." "I'm here." She coughed, hanging sideways in her seatbelt. The adrenaline had flooded her system, masking the pain of the bruises forming across her ribs. "I'm okay, Dom. I'm okay." "Cut the belt," Dominic ordered, handing her a serrated tactical knife he kept in the center console. Sienna grabbed the handle, sawing through the webbing. She dropped onto the shattered passenger window. Dominic was already moving, kicking out the reinforced windshield with a grunt of exertion. He crawled out first, his Glock raised, scanning the smoke. Gunfire erupted instantly. Bullets sparked off the armored undercarriage of the overturned SUV. "Stay down!" Dominic roared, grabbing Sienna by the collar of his tuxedo jacket, which she was still wearing, and hauling her behind the engine block. "Leo!" Sienna screamed, looking at the front seat. Leo the consigliere was slumped over the dashboard. The driver was dead, his neck broken by the impact, but Leo was moving. He groaned, clutching his shoulder where a shard of glass the size of a dagger was embedded. "Leave me, boss!" Leo shouted, racking the slide of his own weapon with one hand. "Go! Get to the safe room." "I don't leave family," Dominic growled. He leaned out from cover, firing 3 controlled shots. 2 shadows in the distance dropped. "Sienna, cover left. On my mark, we move to the statue." Sienna didn't hesitate. She gripped the Sig Sauer P238 Dominic had given her. Her hands were steady. She wasn't the waitress anymore. She wasn't just the wife. She was a survivor. "Mark." They sprinted. The night air buzzed with lead bees. Sienna fired twice at a muzzle flash in the bushes. She didn't know if she hit him, but the firing stopped. They dove behind a massive marble statue of a weeping angel in the center of the courtyard. Dominic checked his magazine. "We can't make the house. They have the front entrance zeroed. We have to go to the garage." "The tunnels?" Sienna asked, breathless. "The tunnels?" Dominic nodded. The Moretti estate, known as Greystone Manor, was built in the 1920s by a bootlegger who was paranoid about the IRS. A series of prohibition tunnels ran from the wine cellar to the garage, and from the garage to the boathouse on the river. "Ready?" Dominic asked. He looked at her. Really looked at her. Her face was smudged with soot, the expensive lingerie torn, the tuxedo jacket hanging off one shoulder. She looked magnificent. "If we get out of this, I'm buying you an island." Sienna managed a grim smile. "Buy me a tank, Dom. It's more practical." They moved. Dominic provided covering fire, the boom of his .45 echoing like cannon fire. Sienna stayed low, moving fast. They reached the side door of the garage, Dominic kicking it open. Inside it was dark and smelled of oil and rubber. Dominic's collection of cars sat silent, Ferraris, Aston Martins. But Dominic headed for a dusty workbench in the corner. He shoved it aside, revealing a trapdoor. "Get in," he commanded. As Sienna lowered herself into the darkness, the garage door blew inward. The mercenaries had breached. Dominic spun around, firing blindly to suppress them, then dropped into the hole, pulling the heavy trap door shut above him and sliding the deadbolt home. They were in total darkness. Dominic clicked on a tactical light on his pistol, illuminating a damp, narrow concrete corridor. "Are we safe?" Sienna whispered, the echo of the gunfire still ringing in her ears. "For now," Dominic said, wiping the blood from his eye. "But they knew the codes, Sienna. The gate was open. The alarms were disabled. This wasn't just an attack." He looked at her, his face grim. "We have a rat, and it's someone high up." The tunnel exit opened into a dense thicket of woods, 3 miles from the main estate, near an old hunting cabin the family owned, but rarely used. It was cold, dusty, and smelled of pine needles and neglect. Dominic kicked the door shut and immediately went to a hidden floor safe under a rug. He spun the dial, left, right, left. The heavy steel door popped open. Inside were stacks of Tashfake passports, a satellite phone, and a laptop. Sienna sat on a dusty wooden chair, her legs shaking as the adrenaline finally began to ebb away. She looked down at her hands. They were covered in dirt and dried blood, not hers. "Drink," Dominic said, pressing a bottle of water into her hands. He had stripped off his ruined shirt and was wrapping a bandage around a graze on his bicep. "We need to call for backup," Sienna said, her voice trembling slightly. "Call Rocco. He's the head of security. He can bring the soldiers." Dominic froze. He didn't look at her. He stared at the wall. "Rocco," Dominic repeated slowly. "Yes. He has the night shift off, remember? That's why he wasn't at the gate." Dominic turned to her. "Sienna, think. Who manages the gate codes? Who creates the rotation schedules?" Sienna's eyes widened. "Rocco." "The gate wasn't forced," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It was opened. The cameras were looped. Only 3 people can do that. Me, Leo, and Rocco." "Leo took a bullet for us," Sienna argued. "It's not Leo." "No," Dominic agreed. "It's not Leo." He picked up the satellite phone. He didn't call for backup. He dialed a number Sienna didn't recognize. "It's me," Dominic said into the phone. "I need a trace. Last known location of Rocco Higgins. And I need the file on Victor Draven's financial backers. Yes. Now." He hung up and turned to the laptop. "Give me the cloner, Sienna." Sienna handed him the black device she had used at the gala. Dominic plugged it in. The screen filled with the data from Arthur Sterling's phone. "We need to find the link," Dominic muttered, scrolling through the files. "Sterling is a pawn. Draven is the muscle. But who is paying for the mercenaries that hit squad back there? That was military grade. That costs millions." Sienna leaned over his shoulder. "Look at the bank transfers. The encrypted app had a wallet feature." Dominic clicked on the finance tab. There were monthly transfers of $500,000 going to an account in the Cayman Islands. But the source... "Shell companies," Dominic cursed. "Dead ends. Wait." Sienna pointed to a recurring metadata tag on the transfers. "Look at the timestamp. Every transfer happens on the 1st of the month at exactly 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the routing number prefix, 021. So, 021 isn't a bank." Sienna said, her mind racing back to her days before she met Dominic, when she worked as a forensic accountant, a life she had left behind but never forgot. "That's a clearinghouse code, specifically for state-level government contracts." Dominic looked at her, stunned. "Government? It's not the government paying them. Sienna clarified, typing commands into the laptop. It's someone in the government using official channels to hide dirty money. Someone who thinks they're untouchable. She hit enter. The trace on the clearinghouse code came back with a digital signature. Judge Anthony Calloway. Dominic sat back the chair, creaking under his weight. Calloway, the federal judge. The one running for the Senate. He was at the gala. Sienna whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. I served him a drink. He was sitting with Arthur Sterling's wife. Calloway is the money, Dominic said, the pieces falling into place. Sterling is the launderer. Draven is the enforcer. And Rocco, the satellite phone rang. Dominic put it on speaker. Boss, a voice crackled. It was his intelligence officer. We found Rocco, or his phone. Where? He's at the Obsidian Tower, penthouse suite, and boss. He's not alone. We picked up audio from the bug we planted on Sterling a month ago. Sterling is there too. Dominic's eyes turned black. They're celebrating. They think we're dead, Sienna said softly. Dominic stood up. He walked to a wooden cabinet on the wall and ripped the padlock off. Inside was an arsenal, 2 AR-15, flashbangs, body armor, and ammunition. He began to strap on a Kevlar vest over his bare chest. The transformation was terrifying. He wasn't just a husband anymore. He was the capo dei capi, the boss of bosses. What are we doing, Dom? Sienna asked, standing up. We're going to crash the party, Dominic said, tossing her a lightweight vest. Put this on. To the Obsidian Tower, it's a fortress. If Draven is there, he'll have 50 men. He thinks I'm a corpse rotting in a burnt-out SUV, Dominic said, checking the bolt of his rifle. Surprise is our only advantage. No, Sienna said, stopping him. She placed a hand on his chest. Surprise isn't enough. You can't shoot your way up 40 floors, Dom. You'll die. Dominic looked down at her. Then what do you suggest? We run. We hide in Europe. No. Sienna's eyes flashed with a cold, calculating light, the same light that had been there when she humiliated Vivian Sterling. We don't shoot our way in. We walk in. How? Judge Calloway, Sienna said. He's the weak link. He's a public figure. He has a reputation to protect. If we can get to him, we can get him to open the door for us. And how do we get to a federal judge in the middle of the night? Sienna smirked. I still have Arthur Sterling's phone data, including the blackmail material Sterling was holding over the judge to keep him loyal. Photos, Dominic. Photos of the judge with, let's just say, not his wife. Dominic stared at her for a long moment, then a slow, dangerous grin spread across his face. He kissed her hard, a kiss of possession and pride. My wife, he whispered against her lips. The devil herself. Let's go take our city back, Sienna said. The Obsidian Tower rose like a black shard of glass against the Manhattan skyline. It was the tallest residential building in the city, a fortress for the ultra-wealthy who wanted to look down on the world they owned. The penthouse occupying the top 3 floors belonged to Victor Draven. Inside, the mood was electric. Victor Draven, a man with a scar running from his ear to his chin, and eyes that blinked too infrequently, poured a glass of scotch. To the end of the Moretti bloodline, Draven toasted, raising his glass. Rocco Higgins. Dominic's former head of security stood by the window looking nervous. He was a massive man, but he was sweating. We haven't found the bodies, Victor. The car was empty. They crawled away to die in the woods. Draven dismissed him. Or they burned to ash. It doesn't matter. With the Camorra leaderless, the captains will fight among themselves. By the time they organize, I'll own the ports." Arthur Sterling sat on a leather sofa looking pale. Vivian was next to him wearing a silk robe, looking bored. "Can we go now?" Vivian complained. "This place gives me the creeps." "Shut up, Vivian," Arthur snapped. "We stay until Victor says we leave." The elevator chime dinged softly. Everyone in the room froze. "I thought you locked the elevator," Draven said, his hand moving to the pistol on his hip. "I did," Rocco said, pulling his own weapon. "It requires a biometric scan or a passcode from the owner." The elevator doors slid open. Walking out was not a SWAT team. It wasn't Dominic kicking down the doors. It was Judge Anthony Calloway. He looked terrified. He was holding a tablet in front of him like a shield. Behind him, the elevator was empty. "Judge?" Draven lowered his gun, slightly confused. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in D.C. I received a message," the judge stammered, walking into the room. "A file. They said if I didn't come here and deliver this, they would release the photos to the New York Times." "Who?" Draven demanded. "Me." The voice came from the balcony. Every head turned. The balcony doors, which had been locked, were now shattered. Standing amidst the broken safety glass, framed by the wind and the city lights, stood Dominic Moretti. But he wasn't alone. Sienna stood beside him. She was no longer wearing the torn dress. She was wearing tactical gear she had looted from the safe house, black cargo pants, a fitted combat vest, and holding an MP5 submachine gun with a terrifying ease. "Rocco," Dominic said. His voice was calm, almost sad. Rocco stepped back, his face draining of color. "Boss, you sold me," Dominic said, stepping over the glass into the living room. "For what money, power? For survival," Rocco shouted, raising his gun. "Draven is the future. You're a dinosaur. Dom. The old ways are dead." Rocco pulled the trigger. Click. Rocco stared at his gun in horror. He racked the slide. Click. Dominic smirked. "You were my head of security, Rocco. You maintained my weapons, but I maintained yours." Dominic raised his AR-15. "I swapped your firing pin 3 days ago. I knew you were meeting with Sterling. I just waited to see how far you'd go." Rocco dropped the useless gun, falling to his knees. "Dom, please." Bang. Dominic didn't hesitate. One shot. Rocco collapsed. Chaos erupted. Draven's 4 bodyguards drew their weapons, but Sienna was faster. She moved like water, dropping to one knee and unleashing a burst of fire that took out the 2 men on the right. Dominic handled the left. Draven dove behind the wet bar. Arthur Sterling screamed, flipping the heavy oak coffee table for cover, dragging Vivian down with him. The room filled with smoke and the smell of cordite. "Calloway, get down!" Sienna yelled. The judge scrambled behind a marble pillar. "Draven!" Dominic roared, advancing on the bar. "Come out! Let's finish this, Victor!" Draven popped up, firing a Desert Eagle blindly. A bullet grazed Dominic's shoulder, spinning him around. "Dom!" Sienna screamed. She broke cover, sprinting across the room. She wasn't running to Dominic. She was running to flank Draven. Draven saw her. He turned his gun toward her. The bitch dies first. Time seemed to slow down. Sienna saw the black bore of the Desert Eagle. She raised her MP5, but she knew she was a split second too slow. Then a scream. Vivian Sterling. Vivian had crawled out from behind the table, not to help, but to run for the exit. In her panic, she tripped over Rocco's body, crashing into Draven just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wild, shattering a priceless vase. Sienna didn't miss. She fired 2 shots. Both hit Draven in the chest. The impact threw him back against the shelves of liquor bottles. They crashed down around him, soaking him in expensive scotch and blood. Silence returned to the penthouse, heavy and thick. Dominic stood up, clutching his shoulder. He walked over to Draven, kicking the gun away from his dying hand. Draven coughed, blood bubbling on his lips. You can't win. The commission will... The commission belongs to me now, Dominic said coldly. You're just a bad memory. Dominic put one final bullet into the floor next to Draven's head. A mercy he didn't deserve, but a message that it was over. Sienna stood panting, her weapon still raised. She looked at Vivian, who was sobbing on the floor, covered in Rocco's blood. "Get up," Sienna ordered. Vivian looked up, her face a mask of pure terror. "Please, don't kill me. I didn't know, I swear." Sienna walked over to her. She looked down at the woman who had ripped her dress just hours ago, the woman who had treated her like dirt. "I'm not going to kill you, Vivian," Sienna said. "That's too easy." Sienna reached into her tactical vest and pulled out a phone, Arthur Sterling's phone. "I'm going to send everything I found on this phone to the FBI," Sienna said. "Your father's money laundering, the judge's corruption, all of it." "No," Arthur Sterling wailed from behind the table. "That will ruin us. We'll go to prison for life." "Exactly." Sienna smiled. "You wanted to be treated like royalty. Now you'll be treated like federal inmates." She looked at Dominic. He was bleeding, battered but alive. He held out his hand to her. Sienna took it. "Is it over?" she asked. Dominic looked around the room at the dead traitor, the defeated enemy, and the corrupted elite cowering on the floor. "No," Dominic said, pulling her close. "This is just the beginning. Now we rebuild, and everyone will know exactly who the Queen of New York is." He kissed her right there in the wreckage of their victory. "Let's go home, Sienna. I owe you a new dress." The morning sun that rose over New York City the day after the siege at the Obsidian Tower did not bring warmth. It brought a cold, hard clarity. The official police report, released by a precinct captain who had been on the Moretti payroll for 15 years, described a botched robbery attempt, resulting in a gang shootout. Victor Draven was listed as a victim of home invasion. Rocco Higgins was an unnamed casualty. But the real news, the news that mattered, was happening in the financial columns and the gossip rags. Within 48 hours, the Sterling Empire disintegrated. Sienna had made good on her threat. She hadn't leaked the information to the press immediately. She had sent it to the IRS and the FBI's Organized Crime Division first. The raid on the Sterling estate was televised live. Arthur Sterling was led out in handcuffs, weeping into his silk pajamas, charged with racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Judge Calloway was found dead in his study 2 days later. The coroner ruled it a heart attack, though the needle mark between his toes suggested a more specific, chemically induced kind of heart failure. A final courtesy from the Camorra to ensure he never testified. 6 months passed. The seasons turned, and winter settled over the city. New York was covered in a blanket of white snow. But inside the exclusive restaurant, Le Coucou, the atmosphere was warm and buzzing with the quiet hum of power. Sienna sat at the head of the table. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform. She wasn't wearing a borrowed tuxedo jacket. She was wearing a custom-made emerald green gown that hugged her curves like a second skin stitched with diamond thread that caught the candlelight. Around the table sat the 5 captains of the New York families, men who had spent their lives believing women belonged in the kitchen or the bedroom. Men who had scoffed when Dominic Moretti married an outsider. Now they didn't scoff. They didn't even speak until she addressed them. The union contracts at the Jersey port are up for renewal. Sienna said, her voice soft, but carrying across the table effortlessly. She swirled a glass of Barolo, looking at the men over the rim. We are raising our protection fees by 20%. 20%? Captain Russo, a man with a thick neck and a thicker skull, grunted. The unions will strike. We can't push them that hard, Donna Moretti. Sienna set her glass down. The sound of crystal hitting wood silenced the room. They won't strike, she said, her eyes locking onto Russo's, because I've already acquired the logistics company that manages their pension funds. If they strike, the fund freezes. They know this. I sent the memo this morning. Russo's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Dominic, who was sitting to Sienna's right, leaning back in his chair, with a look of supreme boredom, or perhaps supreme pride. You heard the Donna, Dominic said, lighting a cigar. 20%. Any other objections? Silence. Good. Sienna smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Then let's eat. As the waiters, actual waiters who moved with respect and fear, brought the first course, Dominic leaned close to Sienna. His hand rested heavily on her thigh beneath the table. You enjoy this, he murmured against her ear, twisting the knife. I learned from the best, Sienna whispered back, placing her hand over his. Besides, someone has to keep your empire running while you play with your guns. Dominic chuckled, a low rumble that vibrated through her chest. My empire, I think we both know whose name is really on the throne now. Later that night, as snow flurried against the windows of the penthouse, Dominic had one last stop to make. Where are we going? Sienna asked as the driver pulled up to a nondescript 24-hour diner in Queens. It was a far cry from Le Coucou. The neon sign buzzed ominously, reading Joe's Greasy Spoon. Closure, Dominic said. He opened the door for her. Sienna stepped out, her emerald gown shielded by a white fur coat. She looked out of place like a diamond in a coal chute. They walked inside. The diner was mostly empty, save for a trucker asleep in a booth and a cook scraping a grill in the back, and one waitress. She was wiping down the counter with a grey rag. Her hair, once perfectly coiffed and highlighted, was pulled back in a messy bun, showing dark roots. Her nails were short and chipped. The customized Valentino gown was a distant memory, replaced by a stained pink uniform that smelled of old friar grease. Vivian Sterling. She didn't look up when the bell rang. She just kept scrubbing her movements, lethargic and broken. Coffee black, Dominic said, sitting on a stool. Vivian froze. She knew that voice. It was the voice of the man who had destroyed her life. Slowly she looked up. Her face was gaunt, aged 10 years in 6 months. When she saw Sienna standing next to him, pristine and glowing with power, Vivian flinched as if she'd been slapped. You, Vivian whispered. Hello, Vivian, Sienna said. She didn't sit. She stood observing the fallen princess. Are you here to kill me? Vivian asked, her voice trembling. My father is in solitary. My mother lost the house. I live in a studio apartment above a laundromat. I have nothing left. I know, Sienna said simply. I arranged it. Vivian dropped the rag. Tears welled in her eyes. Why? Why come here? You won. Isn't that enough? Sienna reached into her purse. She pulled out a crisp $100 bill. She placed it on the counter. You spilled something, Sienna said, pointing to a small coffee stain on the counter. Missed a spot. Vivian stared at the money. Then she stared at the stain. The old Vivian would have screamed. She would have thrown the money back. But the old Vivian was dead. The woman who remained was broken, surviving on minimum wage and fear. With a shaking hand, Vivian picked up the rag. She wiped the spot. "Thank you, ma'am," Vivian whispered, her head lowered in total submission. Sienna watched her for a moment longer. There was no joy in it anymore. Just the cold satisfaction of balance restored. "Keep the change," Sienna said. She turned and walked out into the snow, Dominic at her side. As they got back into the car, Dominic pulled her close, the heat of the vehicle wrapping around them. "Satisfied?" he asked. Sienna rested her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes. She thought of the torn dress, the sneers, the feeling of being small, and then she thought of the fear in Captain Russo's eyes and the submission in Vivian's. "Yes," she said softly. "I'm satisfied." Dominic kissed the top of her head. "Good, because I have a surprise for you at home." "Oh, another dress?" Dominic grinned, his eyes gleaming in the dark. "But this one, I plan on ripping it off myself." Sienna laughed, the sound pure and free. The waitress was gone. The victim was gone. Long live the Queen. And that is the story of Sienna and Dominic Moretti. It's a brutal reminder that you should never judge a book by its cover or a woman by her apron. Vivian Sterling learned the hard way that true power isn't about who your father is or what designer label you wear. It's about the strength you hold inside and the loyalty of the people standing behind you. Sienna went from serving champagne to commanding the most dangerous crime family in New York, proving that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one you overlook. Now I have a question for you guys. If you were Sienna, would you have left Vivian in that diner? Or would you have taken a darker revenge? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, romance, and sweet revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We drop new Mafia romance sagas every week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.